When death comes knocking without warning, it doesn't just take the person who passed away. It takes a piece of those left behind. I was only 13 when I lost my father, and with him, any feeling that the world could be a safe place. Hello, my dear viewers. This is Grandma Jean, with my well-lived 76 years, speaking to you directly from my little corner in Bedford, Virginia. This small town with its mild climate became my refuge after so much turmoil. Today, I'm going to share a story that I've kept close to my heart for over 60 years, a story of pain, but also of resilience. Oh, before I begin, I have exciting news that the channel team asked me to share. Once again, this channel has reached a milestone of 25,000 subscribers. To celebrate, the $300 giveaway has been increased to $500, and there's still time to participate. To enter and have a chance to win this $500, it's very simple. Just subscribe to this channel, like this video, and comment with your name, where you live, and something about yourself. It can be anything: what you enjoy doing, your favorite food, how many children you have, and so on. Now, let's begin. I was born in 1949 in a small town called Bedford in Virginia, nestled in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains, a place where everyone knew everyone, where gossip traveled faster than floodwater, and where family secrets were kept under lock and key, buried in the backyard, along with other shameful things no one wanted to see the light of day. My father, Jonathan, was a man who seemed to be cut from a different cloth than the other men in town. While my friends' fathers were stern, closed-off men of few words, my father was all smiles, hugs, and stories. He worked as an accountant at the town's only bank, always in a well-pressed suit, with that thin mustache he trimmed so carefully every morning in front of the mirror. Jenny, my princess, he called me, even when I wasn't so little anymore. And I loved it, you know. I loved being his princess, loved when he came home from work and twirled me in the air, even though Mom complained that wasn't proper for a girl who was becoming a young lady. Ah, my mother, Catherine. She was always a quiet woman, of few words, as if she had an invisible weight on her shoulders that prevented her from smiling frequently. Beautiful, she certainly was. Black hair, always tied in a bun, fair skin that she protected from the sun as if it were her greatest treasure. But there was a permanent sadness in her eyes, a melancholy that not even my father's antics could completely dispel. Your mother had a difficult life before she met me, my father would explain when I asked why she was so different from my friends' smiling mothers. We need to be patient with her, show extra love to make up for it. And he did. My God, how much love he had to give. He would come home with little flowers picked along the way, prepare surprise breakfasts on Sundays, take us to the town park on holidays. When there was a school event, it was always him who went, sitting proudly in the front row to see me reciting poetry or singing in the choir. Our house was simple but cozy. It was on a quiet street with a small backyard where Mom planted herbs and a cherry tree that was my joy when it was loaded with fruit. I had my own room, small but decorated with flowers that Dad had painted on the wall one rainy Sunday. The best moments of my childhood were Friday nights. Dad would come home from work, we'd all have dinner together, and then the three of us would go to the living room to listen to the radio program he loved. When it ended, he would pick up his guitar and play tunes while Mom and I sang along. In those moments, even she would smile a little, as if for a few minutes she could forget that weight she carried. At school, I was a good student. Not the best, but I tried hard to make Dad proud. Math was my weak point, but he, with all the patience in the world, would sit with me at the kitchen table after dinner and help me with my homework. "It's okay if it's difficult, Jenny," he would say when I cried in frustration because I couldn't understand some equation. The most important things in life we learn through difficulty. I didn't know then how true those words would be in the years to come. It was on an ordinary weekday, a Tuesday in April 1963, that the world came crashing down on my head. I was at school, in English class, when the principal came to get me. In the hallway, with that serious face adults make when something very serious happens. She told me that my father had fallen ill at work and been rushed to the hospital. I ran the 5 blocks that separated the school from the county hospital, my heart almost leaping out of my mouth. When I arrived, I found my mother sitting on a wooden bench in the corridor, her gaze lost, her hands trembling so much she could barely hold the rosary she always carried in her purse. "Mom? Where's Dad? What happened?" I asked, tears already streaming down my face. She didn't answer, nor did she need to. That silence, the way she looked at me as if she didn't recognize me for a moment, told me everything I needed to know. "It was his heart," she finally whispered. "It was very quick. When he got here, he had already gone. A massive heart attack. That's what the doctor called it. A ticking time bomb that no one knew existed in my father's chest. He was only 42, was healthy, never smoked, didn't drink beyond a small glass of wine with Sunday family lunches. The days that followed were a blur of faces, of hugs that didn't console, of empty words from well-meaning people. The wake in our living room, as was customary at the time. The funeral with almost the entire town present, because my father was loved by all. And then, the silence. A deafening silence that took over our house, as if along with my father they had also buried all the laughter, all the songs, all the joy he brought. My mother, who was already quiet before, now seemed like a ghost. She walked around the house without really being there, did the household chores mechanically, spoke only what was necessary. At night, I heard her crying softly in her room. During the day, she would look out the window for hours as if expecting to see my father coming home from work, with that broad smile and open arms to twirl me in the air. I was also devastated inside. I felt a hole in my chest, as if something vital had been ripped out of me. I had nightmares almost every night, woke up calling for him. At school, I couldn't concentrate. My grades dropped. I didn't want to play with friends. "She'll get over it," I heard an aunt tell my mother. Children forget quickly. But how could I forget? How could I move on when the person who loved me most in the world, who made me feel safe and special, had been ripped from my life without even time to say goodbye? Life, however, has a cruel way of continuing, of dragging us forward even when we want to stand still in time. The bills kept coming. Food needed to be bought. Life demanded that we continue living, even broken inside. That's when the financial difficulties began to appear. My father had a small life insurance policy, which soon ran out. My mother had never worked outside the home, had no profession, and no education beyond elementary school. She started cleaning houses for the wealthier families in town, doing laundry for others, selling sweets she made in the early morning after spending the day cleaning other people's houses. I tried to help as much as I could. At 13, I started babysitting younger children after school, for families who could pay a few coins for this service. During vacations, I helped at the corner bakery, arranging the shelves, sweeping the floor. Every penny I earned I handed to my mother, who saved it all in a cookie tin she kept on top of the kitchen cabinet. Even so, it was difficult. Very difficult. The house where we lived was rented, and without my father's salary, it soon became impossible to keep up with the payments. After 3 months of late rent, we had to leave, move to a tiny house in the backyard of an elderly lady's property, who charged less in exchange for us taking care of her as well. Seeing my mother, who was already so sad before, sinking deeper and deeper into a silent depression, broke my heart. She lost weight visibly, hardly ate, worked until she collapsed from exhaustion. Many nights I found her asleep at the kitchen table, on the clothes she was ironing, the iron still hot beside her. Life had become a constant struggle for survival. I missed not only my father, his love and protection, but the security he gave us, the certainty that we would have food on the table the next day, that we wouldn't be evicted, that there would be medicine if we got sick. It was in this most vulnerable moment of our lives that Robert appeared, and with him, a promise of better days that would soon prove to be the worst trap we could fall into. Robert Taylor entered our lives on a Sunday after church. My mother and I were leaving, she in that black dress she hadn't taken off since my father's funeral, me in clothes that were already too small, given to me by a neighbor. He approached us, hat in hand, a polite smile on his face. "Mrs. Catherine? I'm Robert Taylor. I worked at the bank with your husband. My condolences for Jonathan. He was a fine man." My mother thanked him with a nod, without really looking at him. She was like that with everyone, distant, locked in her own grief. But Robert didn't give up easily. He walked us home, talking the whole time, telling stories about my father that I had never heard, asking questions about how we were managing, offering help. "If you need anything, just call," he said when we reached Mrs. Wilson's gate, where we now lived. "I live right on Oak Street, number 18. Just knock on the door." I found it strange. My father had worked at the bank for more than 10 years, knew everyone there. How had he never mentioned this Robert? How had he never brought him home for coffee, as he did with other colleagues from work? But my mother didn't seem to notice anything strange. In fact, for the first time in months, I saw a spark of life in her eyes when she said goodbye to him. A tiny thing, an almost imperceptible glow, but it gave me hope that maybe, just maybe, she could return to being a bit of the mother she was before. Robert started showing up almost every day. He brought groceries that were left over at his house, offered to fix broken things, helped me with my math homework. He was polite, well-mannered, always well-dressed and smelling good. He must have been about 35, hair already graying at the temples, dark eyes that smiled when he smiled. "He's a good man," Mrs. Wilson commented one afternoon as I helped braid her thin hair. "It's clear he's interested in your mother, girl." I felt a tightness in my chest. Interested in my mother? How so? My father had died less than 6 months ago. How could she think of another man so soon? But the truth is that, with Robert's constant presence, my mother was changing. It wasn't a dramatic transformation. She was still quiet, still had that permanent sadness in her eyes. But she started to dress a little better, to wear a dress that wasn't black once in a while, to comb her hair more carefully. And most importantly, she started to talk more, to smile slightly when he told a joke, to take an interest in things beyond the exhausting routine of work. I should have been happy for her, I know, but something inside me resisted. It was as if, by accepting Robert into our lives, we were somehow betraying my father's memory, as if we were saying he was replaceable, that the hole he left could be filled by someone else. "Your father would want us to be happy, Jenny," my mother told me one night after Robert had left. It was the first time in months that we really talked. He wouldn't want us to spend the rest of our lives crying. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was being selfish and childish. After all, she was still young, not even 40 years old. And our life was so difficult. Robert had a good job at the bank, owned his own house, could give us a security we had lost. Even so, I couldn't feel comfortable around him. There was something in Robert's eyes, something that appeared when my mother wasn't looking, when it was just him and me in the living room while she finished dinner in the kitchen. A strange, calculating gleam that gave me chills. "You'll see, Jenny," he told me once softly, placing his hand on my knee in a way that made me shrink back. "I'm going to take very good care of you two, especially you." I tried to talk to my mother about this, about the discomfort I felt, but she didn't want to listen. "Of course you're confused, honey. It's normal. You adored your father. Nobody's going to replace him. But Robert just wants to help, just wants what's best for us." 3 months after Robert entered our lives, he asked my mother to marry him. It was on a Sunday, after the lunch he himself had brought. Roast chicken bought at the bakery, rice, beans, even a bottle of wine. He knelt in our tiny living room, pulled a small box from his pocket with a simple ring, and made the proposal. My mother cried, said it was too soon, that she didn't know if she was ready. But Robert insisted, spoke of love, of care, of how he wanted to give a better life to us both. "You can move into my house as early as next week," he said, as if the yes was already guaranteed. "There's plenty of room there, a room just for Jenny, a large backyard." When my mother looked at me, silently asking for my approval, I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced a smile. Who was I to prevent her from being happy again? Who was I to condemn us both to a life of constant struggle when there was an easier way out right there? They got married in a simple ceremony at the courthouse, without a party, without guests besides me and 2 witnesses that Robert arranged. My mother wore a light blue dress, the first colorful one since my father's death. She wasn't radiant as a bride should be, but there was a cautious hope in her eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. We moved to Robert's house the next day. It was a nice house, much bigger than any place we had lived before. It had 3 bedrooms, a large living room, a kitchen with new cabinets, even a yard with fruit trees. My room was at the end of the corridor, far from their room, which gave me a privacy I had never had before. The first weeks were normal. Robert would leave early for work, come back in the late afternoon. We would have dinner together, talk about the day. He would ask about school, about my friends, seemed genuinely interested. My mother was more animated, cooking elaborate dishes, tidying the house with great care, as if she wanted to prove that she deserved this second chance. I was still uncomfortable, but I tried to convince myself that it was just a matter of time, of adaptation. After all, he was being good to us. He had paid my overdue school fees, had bought new supplies, had even given me a bicycle as a gift, something I had always dreamed of having and my parents had never been able to give me. It was about a month after the wedding that things started to change, subtly at first, so slowly that we hardly noticed the transformation. First came the criticism of the food. "It's too salty," he would say, pushing the plate away. Or, "That's not how you season meat, Catherine." Then, the complaints about the cleanliness of the house. "Look at this dust on the furniture. What kind of housewife are you?" My mother, anxious to please him, worked even harder. She cleaned the house from top to bottom every day, tried new recipes, spent hours in front of the mirror getting ready before he arrived. But nothing seemed to be enough. The criticisms extended to me too. My grades, which were improving since I had started attending school regularly again, were never good enough. My way of speaking was too sassy for a girl. My clothes were indecent or sloppy, depending on his mood. And then he started drinking. Not much at first, just a glass of whiskey after dinner. Then two, then the whole bottle. And with the drink came the real Robert, the one who had hidden behind the mask of a good and kind man. The first time he hit my mother was because of a button, a simple button from his shirt that had fallen off, and she hadn't sewn back on. We were having dinner when he noticed it and suddenly exploded, turning over the table, breaking dishes, grabbing my mother by the hair. I ran to defend her, but he pushed me with such force that I hit my head against the wall. I stayed there, dizzy, watching him drag my mother to the bedroom, her screams turning into pleas, then into silence. The next morning, he acted as if nothing had happened. He had breakfast, gave a kiss on my mother's forehead, who had a black eye made up as best she could, wished me a good day at school. When I returned, my mother was cleaning the house as always, mechanical movements, empty gaze. "Mom, we need to get out of here," I whispered, afraid he might hear, even though he was at work. "He's going to do it again. It's going to get worse." She just shook her head, not looking me in the eye. "It was just this once, Jenny. He drank too much, lost his head. He's already apologized, promised it won't happen again. But it did happen. Of course it did." The following week, it was because dinner was late. In another, because he thought she was looking, in a flirty way, at the mailman. There was always an excuse, a reason for the violence. And always, the next day, came the apologies, the promises, sometimes even flowers or a gift. My mother, who was already fragile before, was breaking more and more. That small flame of life that had returned to her eyes when she met Robert was fading until nothing remained but fear and resignation. As for me, he kept a calculated distance. He criticized, humiliated with words, sometimes pushed me or slapped me, but nothing compared to what he did to my mother. I was just the annoying stepdaughter, the constant reminder that my mother had a life before him, loved another man before him. At the same time, I began to notice another kind of look coming from him. When I came out of the shower, when I changed clothes in my room with the door not fully closed, when I bent down to pick something up from the floor, a look that made me feel dirty, exposed, vulnerable. I started locking myself in my room whenever possible, taking showers only when he wasn't home, wearing clothes that were too big to hide my body that was starting to change, to develop. The town began to talk. In a small town like ours, secrets have short legs. People saw my mother's poorly disguised bruises, noticed how she had become a shadow of the woman she was before. They saw how I walked with my head down, scared, different from the cheerful girl I used to be. But no one did anything. In a husband and wife's fight, you don't stick a spoon, they would say, shrugging, as if it were normal, acceptable, for a man to beat his wife inside their home, as if it were just a private matter and not a crime. Even the teachers at school, who saw my eyes swollen from crying so much, my grades falling again, my growing isolation, preferred to look the other way. It was easier that way. Less complicated, less risky. Gradually, I understood a harsh truth. We were alone in this. No one would come to save us. If we wanted to escape, we would have to find strength within ourselves. I tried to convince my mother so many times to leave. We could go back to Mrs. Wilson's house or look for relatives in other cities, start over anywhere away from him. But she always found excuses. We don't have money, Jenny. Where would we go? He'll find us. It will be worse. Sometimes he's good to us, you know. Every marriage has problems, honey. The last excuse was the one that infuriated me the most. What kind of marriage problems included black eyes and broken ribs? What kind of husband made his wife lock herself in the bathroom, trembling with fear when she heard the front door opening? That wasn't a marriage with problems. It was a prison, a slow-motion death sentence. And then, when I turned 14, it happened. The day that changed everything, that made me understand that I needed to act, and quickly, before it was too late. The day Robert showed his true face, not just to my mother, but to me as well. It was on a Friday that everything changed. I remember it as if it were yesterday. Every detail etched in my memory as if it had happened yesterday, not more than 6 decades ago. It was math test day, my hardest subject. I had studied a lot, stayed up late redoing exercises, but even so, when I saw the questions on the test, my mind simply froze. The fear of disappointing, the pressure I put on myself, the terror of going home with a low grade, knowing how Robert would react. All of this made me unable to concentrate. I handed in the test almost blank. I left school with a weight on my chest, a bad feeling that accompanied me all the way home. I thought about not returning, about running away to anywhere. But where would a 14-year-old girl go without money, without documents, without anyone to help? I arrived home, and my mother immediately noticed that something was wrong. "What is it, honey?" she asked softly as I dropped my backpack in the corner of the kitchen. "The math test," I confessed, already with tears in my eyes. "I couldn't do almost anything. I'm going to get a terrible grade." She hugged me, something rare in those days. "It's going to be all right," she whispered in my ear. "Don't tell Robert anything today. He had a hard day at work, already came home nervous. Tomorrow we'll talk calmly. Think about what to do." I agreed, relieved to be able to postpone the inevitable. We had dinner in silence, while Robert drank one glass after another, his face getting redder and redder, his eyes getting cloudier and cloudier. I helped my mother clear the table, wash the dishes, and then I retreated to my room, silently thanking that for one more day he was ignoring me. I was doing my English homework when I heard the noise, the unmistakable sound of glass breaking, followed by my mother's scream. Then the thud of a body falling. More screams, "Please." I was paralyzed for a few seconds, my heart racing, the pencil still in my hand. It was always like this. He would start with my mother, and if I appeared, if I tried to interfere, it would only make everything worse. She herself begged me to stay in my room, not to get involved. But this time it was different. Amid her screams, I heard my name. "Jenny has nothing to do with it. Please, Robert, leave her alone." I felt a chill down my spine. Why was she talking about me? What had happened? I opened the door to my room slowly, my heart beating so hard it felt like it would come out of my mouth. From where I was, I could see part of the living room. My mother was on the floor, a trickle of blood running from her forehead, her arms raised in a useless attempt to protect herself. Robert was standing, holding a paper in his hand, shaking it in front of her. "Did you know about this? Did you know?" he shouted, his voice slurred by drink. "This little tramp got a 0 on the test. 0. After everything I do for you two, this is how you thank me?" My blood froze. The teacher must have called to give the news of the test, or perhaps some classmate had commented to their parents who told Robert at the bar or at the bank. Small town is like that. News travels faster than the wind. "She tried, Robert," my mother pleaded. "Math is hard for her. Jonathan always—" It was the wrong thing to say. Mentioning my father's name was like lighting a match near gasoline. Robert turned red with rage, his eyes bloodshot, a vein throbbing on his forehead. "Don't talk about that man in my house," he shouted, giving my mother such a strong slap that she fell again. I couldn't contain myself. I ran out of my hiding place, threw myself in front of my mother, facing Robert for the first time. "Leave her alone, it's my fault, not hers." For a moment, he seemed surprised by my audacity. Then, a strange smile formed on his face, a smile that made me shiver to my soul. "Ah, so the little princess decided to defend Mommy? Very nice. But you're right, it is your fault. And you know what happens to disobedient girls who get zeros on tests?" He took a step in my direction, staggering a bit from the drink. Instinctively, I backed away. "Robert, please." My mother tried to get up, grabbing his leg. "She's just a child." He kicked her away as if she were an irritating insect. "A child? Look at her well, Catherine. She's turning into a woman, and she needs to learn to respect the man of the house." The way he said this, the look he cast at my body, made me feel naked, exposed. I understood at that moment what was about to happen, and terror paralyzed me. "Mom," I whispered, begging with my eyes for her to do something, anything. She looked at me, then at Robert, and I saw something die in her eyes. A complete surrender, an acceptance of the inevitable. She lowered her head, unable to face her husband, unable to protect her own daughter. "Go to your room, Catherine," Robert ordered. "I'm going to teach this girl a lesson she'll never forget." To my absolute horror, my mother obeyed. She got up with difficulty, gave me one last look, a look that asked for forgiveness but offered no help, and left the living room, closing the bedroom door behind her. It was at that moment that I understood. I was completely alone. The person who should protect me at all costs had chosen to protect herself first. Out of fear, out of cowardice, out of years of abuse that had broken something fundamental inside her. What happened in the hours that followed is something I still find difficult to talk about, even after so many decades. The physical pain was terrible, of course, but worse still was the pain of betrayal, the understanding that my own mother had abandoned me at the moment I needed her most. Robert raped me that night. Not once, but several times. He used my body as if it were a thing, an object to discharge his anger, his frustration, his sick desires. And the whole time, on the other side of the wall, my mother remained silent, knowing what was happening, hearing my screams, my pleas, and choosing to do nothing. When it was finally over, when he fell into a heavy sleep, drunk from alcohol and from his own monstrous act, I dragged myself to the bathroom. I turned on the shower and sat on the cold floor, letting the water run down my battered body, as if it could clean not only the blood and sweat, but also the shame, the disgust, the despair. I stayed there. I don't know how long. Minutes? Hours? Time had lost its meaning. I only know that at some point, with the water already cold, I made a decision. I would not spend another night in that house. I preferred to die on the street than to wait for him to decide to use me again. I dressed with difficulty, choosing loose clothes that would hide the bruises, that wouldn't draw attention. I took my school backpack, emptied the books, and put in the little I had of value. A change of clothes, a toothbrush, the only photo I had of my father, and some coins I kept in a small box since I started working taking care of children. Before leaving, I went to my mother's bedroom door. I hesitated, my hand on the doorknob. Part of me wanted to go in, wake her up, beg one last time for her to come with me, to choose her daughter instead of the monster she had married. But another part, the part that had grown that night in a brutal and irreversible way, knew it would be useless. She had already made her choice, and I needed to make mine. I left the house without looking back, in the cold dawn of a sleeping town. I had no idea where to go, what to do, how to survive. I just knew that any place would be better than there, that any uncertain future would be preferable to that certain horror. I walked aimlessly for hours, the tears drying on my face as the sky slowly brightened. When the sun began to rise, I found myself in front of the town's bus station, a small place with only a few bus lines that connected our small town to larger places. I counted the money I had. It wasn't much, would barely pay for a ticket to the nearest city, but it was enough to start, to escape, to have a chance, however small. I entered the bus station, looked at the schedule board. The first bus would leave in half an hour to Roanoke. A big city where I could get lost, where no one would know me, where Robert would have difficulty finding me if he decided to look for me. I bought the ticket with trembling hands, fearing all the time that someone would recognize me, that they would ask why a 14-year-old girl was alone at the bus station at dawn, with a school backpack and eyes swollen from crying so much. But no one asked. No one cared. Just as no one had cared about the obvious signs of abuse in our house for months, the indifference that had hurt me before was now my ally. I sat on the almost empty bus, in the last seat, huddled against the window. And when the engine roared and we started to move away, I felt a strange mixture of relief and terror. I was escaping from hell, yes, but where was I going? What would become of me now? I didn't know then that that bus ride would be just the beginning of a much longer journey. That I would be fleeing not only from Robert, but also from the memories, the pain, the betrayal. That I would need to build a completely new life, alone, without any support, at an age when most girls were still playing with dolls. I didn't know that it would take years until I could sleep a whole night without nightmares. That the sound of a bottle breaking would make me tremble decades later. That I would have difficulty trusting people, especially men, for the rest of my life. But I also didn't know of my own strength, of my resilience, of the ability I would have to transform that terrible pain into something productive, into something that would one day help other people. As the bus moved away from the town that had been my home for my entire life, I looked out the window one last time. The sun was rising, painting the sky pink and gold. A new day was beginning, and for me, a new life too. It was the most terrible night of my existence. But it was also the night I discovered I was alone in the world, and that somehow I would have to find the strength to move forward anyway. I arrived in Roanoke completely lost. A small-town girl, 14 years old in a big city, without knowing anyone, without having anywhere to go. When I got off the bus at the station, the noise, the crowd, everything scared me. For a moment, I almost regretted having run away. But then I remembered the previous night, the horror at Robert's hands, my mother's silent complicity. And I knew there was no going back. I needed to move forward, however frightening it might be. I spent the first day wandering around the city, carrying my backpack, trying not to look as desperate as I felt. I spent a few coins on bread at the bakery, saving the rest carefully. It was all I had in the world. At night, when it started to get dark, fear tightened. Where would I sleep? How would I protect myself? I ended up finding a bench in a park, half hidden by bushes. It wasn't safe, I knew, but what choice did I have? I curled up there, the backpack hugged against my chest, trying to sleep a little, startling at every noise. It was like that for 3 days. Wandering during the day, sleeping in hidden places at night, eating as little as possible to save money that was running out fast. I washed my face in public bathrooms, tried to keep my appearance minimally presentable, but it was getting increasingly difficult. On the 4th day, a lady approached me in a park. I was sitting on a bench, looking at nothing, hungry and exhausted. She stopped in front of me, studied me for a moment, and then asked, "How many days have you been on the street, girl?" I thought about lying, about saying I was just waiting for someone, that I had a home, a family. But I was so tired of pretending, so desperate for help, that the truth escaped before I could contain it. 4 days, she nodded as if she already knew. And where did you come from? From Bedford. Running from what? I lowered my eyes, unable to answer. How to explain the unexplainable to a stranger? She sighed, sat down beside me. You don't need to tell me if you don't want to, but you can't continue like this. You'll end up being caught by some bad character or by the police. Do you know what they do with minors they find on the streets? They send them back home, to their parents. The terror must have been visible on my face because she quickly added, "Calm down. I'm not going to report you. I'm just saying you need help." Her name was Mrs. Martha. She was a retired teacher, a widow, lived alone in a small house not far from there. She had observed me in the park for 2 days, she said, noticing that I wasn't a common street girl, that something very serious must have happened to put me in that situation. "Come with me," she offered. "You can take a shower, eat something, sleep in a real bed, then we'll decide what to do." It was risky to trust a stranger, I knew. But what did I have to lose? If her intentions were bad, I would run away again. I was getting good at that. Mrs. Martha's house was simple but welcoming, full of books and plants. She showed me the bathroom, gave me clean towels, even set aside an old dress of her daughter who lived far away. I took my first real bath in days, washed my hair, felt almost human again. Afterward, she served me homemade soup with bread, which I ate with such hunger that I barely breathed between spoonfuls. Only when I finished, when my stomach was full and my body clean, did the tears come. I cried like I hadn't allowed myself until then, sobbing so hard that my whole body shook, releasing not just the tension of the last days, but all the accumulated pain of the last months. Mrs. Martha didn't ask anything. She just waited for me to calm down, offered me a handkerchief, and then said, with a simplicity that disarmed me, "When you're ready to talk, I'll be ready to listen." That night, I slept in a real bed for the first time since I ran away. In the room that had been her daughter's, with clean sheets that smelled of fabric softener, a window that looked out onto a backyard with apple and cherry trees, I slept like a rock, too exhausted to even dream. The next morning, I woke up disoriented, not recognizing where I was. For a moment of panic, I thought I was back at Robert's house, that everything had been a dream, the escape, the bus station, the days on the street. Then I heard sounds of pots in the kitchen, smelled fresh coffee, and remembered. I was in Mrs. Martha's house. I was safe, for now. During breakfast, she didn't insist on questions. She talked about the weather, about the plants in the backyard, about a book she was reading, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to have a runaway teenager sitting at her table. It was only later, when we were washing the dishes together, me washing, her drying, that I managed to start talking. The words came out gradually, hesitant at first, then in a flow that I could no longer contain. I told about my father's death, about my mother's depression, about Robert's arrival in our lives, and finally, with my voice almost disappearing, I told about that last night, about what he had done to me, about how my mother had closed the bedroom door, choosing not to see, not to help. Mrs. Martha listened to everything in silence, only a muscle twitching in her jaw, revealing the anger she felt. When I finished, when there was nothing more to say, she simply hugged me. A firm, maternal hug, the kind of hug I hadn't felt since my father died. "You're not going back there," she said, not as an offer, but as a statement. Not while I'm alive. In the days that followed, Mrs. Martha and I established a routine. She left early to give private tutoring to neighborhood children, her way of supplementing her retirement. I stayed at home, helped with the cleaning, learned to cook simple dishes. At night, after dinner, she gave me lessons. English, math, history, science, all the subjects I was missing by not being in school. She was a demanding but patient teacher who knew how to explain in a way that made everything seem easier, more interesting. "You're smart, John," she often told me. "You can't waste that brain. Education is the only thing no one can take away from you. Remember that." After 2 weeks living with her, we had the conversation, the one I had been dreading since the first day. "We need to regularize your situation," she said, serious. "You can't live like a ghost forever. You need to go back to school, have documents, officially exist." The panic returned in full force. "But if we do that, they'll send me back. To him," she shook her head. "Not necessarily. There are other possibilities. But we need legal help." The next day, she took me to a place called Child Protective Services. It was a simple house, adapted for offices, where volunteer lawyers served cases like mine, children and adolescents in vulnerable situations. The lawyer who assisted us, Mr. Richard, was a young man with a kind look. He listened to my story attentively, taking notes, occasionally asking questions to clarify details. When I finished, he took a deep breath and explained our options. "The ideal would be to file a formal complaint against your stepfather. Based on what you've reported, there are sufficient elements for a criminal case for statutory rape, in addition to all the previous physical abuse." I swallowed hard. The idea of facing Robert in a courtroom, of having to look at him again, terrified me. "But," continued Mr. Richard, noticing my discomfort, "I understand that this may be very difficult for you right now. What we need, at a minimum, is to ensure that you are not forced to return to that house." He explained that we would make a request for special emancipation. Normally, emancipation was only granted from the age of 16 and under specific circumstances. But with the report of serious abuse, there were chances of getting an exception. Meanwhile, he concluded, we will register Mrs. Martha as your temporary guardian. This will allow you to be enrolled in school, have access to health services, and officially exist without the risk of being returned to your parents. It was a long and, in many moments, painful process. I had to repeat my story several times to social workers, psychologists, the juvenile court judge. I had to undergo medical examinations that proved the abuse. I had to face looks of pity, of disbelief, sometimes even of judgment. My mother was notified of the process. She didn't attend any hearing, didn't contest my emancipation request, didn't show any interest in recovering me. Robert, on the other hand, tried to interfere, not out of concern for me, I knew, but out of fear of the legal consequences of what he had done. Fortunately, the evidence against him was too strong, and the judge decided in my favor. At 15, I became officially emancipated, a rare, exceptional case which was only possible due to the extreme circumstances and the tireless support of Mrs. Martha and Mr. Richard. With my legal situation resolved, I could finally return to school. I entered the first year of high school, with classmates a little younger than me. I had lost almost a year with all the turmoil. At the beginning it was difficult. I felt displaced, different, marked in some invisible but perceptible way by the traumatic experience I had lived through. But the thirst to learn, to recover lost time, spoke louder. I dedicated myself to studies with an intensity that surprised even the teachers. Math, which had always been my Achilles heel, became a personal challenge that I refused to lose. I studied extra hours, did all the exercises 2-3 times, asked for help when needed. You don't need to be the best at everything, Jean, Mrs. Martha would tell me, concerned about my obsession with perfect grades. You just need to do your best. But I knew I needed to be exceptional. It was the only way to guarantee a different future, to not depend on anyone, to never be vulnerable like I had been. Alongside school, I started working part-time at a bookstore near home. The owner, Mr. Arnold, was a friend of Mrs. Martha and agreed to hire me even though I was a minor, on the condition that it wouldn't interfere with my studies. The salary wasn't much, but it gave me an independence I had never known before. I could buy my own things, help with household expenses, even save a little every month thinking about the future. The bookstore became my second home. In my free moments, I devoured books of all kinds: novels, biographies, history books, science. It was as if each page read distanced me a little more from that frightened girl who had fled Bedford on a cold dawn, brought me closer to the woman I wanted to become. It was in this bookstore that I met Professor Eugene. He taught history at the State University and was a regular customer, always looking for rare books about American history. We started talking about books, then about history, then about everything. He noticed my interest, my curiosity, and began to recommend readings, to lend me books from his own library. You should think about going to college, John, he told me one day, after a long discussion about the American Civil War. You have a brilliant mind that can't be wasted. College? The idea had never occurred to me. People like me, without family, without resources, struggling to survive day by day, didn't go to university. At least that's what I thought. It's possible, he insisted. There are scholarships, assistance programs. It would be hard, of course, but not impossible. And it would be worth every effort. That conversation planted a seed that would bloom years later. But at that moment, I was focused on finishing high school, on staying on my feet, on building a life that, if not exactly happy, was at least safe, stable. The years passed. I finished high school with exemplary grades, continued working at the bookstore, now full-time. Mrs. Martha, who was already elderly when she took me in, started having health problems. Arthritis, high blood pressure, vision problems that prevented her from continuing to give private lessons. Our roles slowly reversed. Now it was I who took care of her, who did the shopping, cooked, accompanied her to the doctor. It wasn't a burden. It was an honor to be able to give back a little of the much she had done for me. It was for her that I finally decided to try college. I wanted her to see me graduate, wanted to give her that pride before it was too late. I studied like never before for the entrance exam, while working, while taking care of the house, while helping Mrs. Martha with her medicines and appointments. In 1969, at 20 years old, I entered the history department of Virginia State University, the first in my family, if I could still call those people in Bedford family, to reach higher education. When I received the news of the approval, Mrs. Martha cried, hugged me, said she always knew I would succeed. "You flew, Jenny," she said, using the nickname that only she still used. "You flew with broken wings, but you flew anyway." And it was true. Somehow, despite everything, I had learned to fly. It wasn't a perfect flight. It wasn't without pain or scars, but it was my flight, conquered with tears, sweat, and a determination that even I didn't know I possessed. The girl who ran away from home at dawn, with just a backpack and a broken heart, was turning into the woman I always wanted to be, free, strong, master of my own destiny. College opened a completely new world for me. After years living in the protective cocoon that Mrs. Martha and I had created, suddenly I found myself exposed to people, ideas, and experiences I never would have imagined. It was frightening and liberating at the same time. The first months were difficult. Balancing work at the bookstore, caring for Mrs. Martha, who was increasingly frail, and the demands of studies seemed almost impossible. Many nights I cried from exhaustion, questioning whether I had made the right choice, whether I wasn't being presumptuous in thinking that someone like me could have a university education. But with each obstacle overcome, with each successful test, with each compliment from a professor, I felt stronger, more capable. I began to make friends. Not many, as I was still reserved, still had difficulty trusting people, but a few precious ones who didn't care about my nebulous past, who accepted me as I was. Among them was Mary, a literature student I met in the library. Outgoing, talkative, always laughing. She was the opposite of me in many ways. Perhaps that's why we got along so well. She pulled me out of my shell, reminded me that there was joy in the world, that not everything was struggle and pain. It was Mary who convinced me to go to my first college party. I resisted, invented 1,000 excuses, but she insisted so much that I eventually gave in, more to silence her than out of my own will. "You'll like it, John, I promise," she assured me. "And if you don't like it, we'll leave right away. I just want you to live a little, breathe, meet new people." The party was at a fraternity house near campus. Loud music, colored lights, young people laughing, dancing, drinking, dating. A completely strange environment for me, who had spent the last years between books and responsibilities. I stayed in a corner, holding a cup of soda, observing that strange and somewhat intimidating world. That's when he approached. Tall, slim, brown hair falling over his eyes, a shy smile that didn't match his imposing height. "First time at a frat party?" he asked, and when I nodded he added, "I'm not a big fan either. I came because my roommate is the birthday boy and insisted." His name was Paul, engineering student in his 3rd year. We talked for hours that night, first at the party, then at a late-night diner, finally walking through the deserted campus under the starry sky. We talked about books, music, dreams for the future. He didn't ask me about my past, and I didn't offer to tell. It was as if we had made a silent agreement that what mattered was who we were at that moment, not what had been left behind. When we said goodbye, almost at dawn, he asked for my phone number. I gave the bookstore number, the only one I had. I thought he would never call. Guys like him, intelligent, handsome, from a good family, weren't interested in complicated girls like me. But he called. The next day, and the day after, and the day after that. We began to meet after classes, to study together in the library, to walk in the park on weekends. It was a friendship, I told myself, nothing more than that. It couldn't be more than that. After all, what did I know about relationships? The only reference I had was my mother's sick marriage to Robert, and before that, the few years with my father, idealized by a child's memory. How could I trust a man, any man, after what I had been through? Paul respected my limits, my silences, my retreats. He never pressured, never demanded more than I could give. When I finally told him about my past, not everything, just enough for him to understand my scars, he just held my hand and said, "Thank you for trusting me enough to share this." It was at that moment that I realized I was falling in love. And that terrified me. "You deserve to be happy, Jean," Mrs. Martha told me when I confessed my fear. "Don't let that monster continue to control your life, even from a distance. That would be giving him a victory he doesn't deserve." She was right, I knew, but it was easier said than done. Fear had deep roots, intertwined with every part of my being. It wasn't something I could simply uproot and throw away. Paul understood this better than I did myself. With infinite patience, he untied knot by knot of my traumas, showing me that not all men were like Robert, that true love didn't hurt, didn't humiliate, didn't destroy. Our first kiss happened almost 6 months after we met. We were sitting on the campus lawn, studying for final exams. Suddenly, he closed his book, looked at me with those gentle eyes, and asked if he could kiss me. The simple fact that he had asked, that he had waited for my permission, already showed the abyss that separated him from Robert. "Yes," I answered. And it was as if a floodgate opened inside me. Not just for love, but for the possibility of a life beyond survival, beyond the constant struggle, beyond fear. We graduated in 1973, me in history, him in engineering. Mrs. Martha, already quite debilitated, made a point of going to the ceremony. Sitting in the front row, wearing her best dress, she applauded with tears in her eyes when I received my diploma. "I'm so proud of you, my daughter," she said afterward. And no one questioned the "my daughter," because that's exactly what I was. Not by blood, but by heart. Paul received a job offer in Bedford, Virginia, a growing engineering firm, a good salary, prospects for the future. He asked me to go with him, not as a friend, not as a girlfriend, but as his wife. The marriage proposal came on a simple night, without grand gestures, just the two of us sitting on Mrs. Martha's porch looking at the stars. "I want to build a life with you, Jean," he said. "A life of partnership, of respect, of love. If you want, if you're ready." Was I ready? I didn't know. Part of me was still afraid, still expected that at any moment the mask of kindness would fall and reveal another Robert. But another part, the part that had grown and learned to trust again, knew that Paul was different, that he deserved a chance, that I deserved a chance. "Yes," I answered, for the second time giving him a permission that would change my life, but with one condition. "Mrs. Martha comes with us. I can't abandon her." He didn't hesitate for even a second. "Of course, she's your family. Now she'll be my family too." We got married in 1974, in a small but joyful ceremony. Mrs. Martha, Mary, some friends from college, and colleagues from the bookstore where I worked for so many years. Mr. Arnold, the bookstore owner, made a point of walking me down the aisle. "If your father were here," he said, "I'm sure he would be very proud of the woman you've become." The move to Bedford was a new beginning. A new house, a new city, new jobs. I got a position as a teacher at a private school, fulfilling another dream. And with Mrs. Martha occupying the guest room, it was as if we had formed our own improvised family, united not by blood, but by love and mutual respect. The first years of marriage were a constant learning experience, not just about how to live with another person, how to share space and routine, but about how to love and be loved in a healthy way. Paul had to learn to deal with my moments of panic, with the nightmares that still woke me up sweating in the middle of the night. I had to learn not to expect the worst from him at every disagreement, not to flinch when he raised his hand, to grab something from a high shelf, not to hit me. In 1976, I discovered I was pregnant. The news was received with joy by Paul and Mrs. Martha, but with a confusing mixture of emotions by me. Happiness, of course, but also terror. What if I didn't know how to be a mother? What if I repeated the mistakes of my own mother? What if I couldn't protect my child as I wasn't protected? "You'll be a wonderful mother precisely because you know what not to do," Mrs. Martha assured me. "The scars we carry can destroy us or teach us. You chose to learn from them." My daughter, Amy, was born in January 1977. A healthy baby, with rosy cheeks and a tuft of dark hair like mine. When I held her in my arms for the first time, I felt a love so intense it almost hurt. And along with that love, a fierce resolution. This child would never know the kind of pain I knew, would never feel abandoned, betrayed, alone in the world. 2 years later came Michael, so different from his sister, blonde like his father, calm where she was agitated, observant where she was talkative. Our perfect quartet, completed by the quintet with Mrs. Martha, who despite her advanced age still had energy to tell stories, teach songs, be the grandmother my children wouldn't have by blood. Life followed its course, with the normal joys and challenges of any family. Paul was promoted. I became a coordinator at the school. We bought our own house, a little bigger, with a garden where the children could play. It was in 1982 that the past came back to knock on our door. A letter from Bedford, informing that my mother had died. Heart attack, the letter said. She was being buried that week. I stood looking at that paper for hours, not knowing what to feel. I had had no contact with her since the night I ran away. She had never tried to find me, had never contested my emancipation, had never shown any regret for what she had allowed to happen. "Do you want to go to the funeral?" Paul asked gently. I thought for a long time. "No," I finally answered. Not out of anger or resentment, but because there's nothing there for me. My mother died for me that night when she closed the bedroom door. What remained was just an empty shell. He understood. He always understood. The letter also mentioned, almost as a footnote, that Robert had died years earlier, in 1975, in a car accident. He was drunk, had crashed into a tree. No one else was injured. I felt a strange relief upon learning this. Not joy. I never wished death on anyone, not even him. But a certain closure, as if a particularly dark chapter had finally been definitively closed. The years passed. The children grew up. Amy graduated in medicine, Michael in law. Both married, gave us grandchildren, 5 in total, who are the joy of my old age. Mrs. Martha lived to be 97, lucid until the end, passing away peacefully on an autumn afternoon in 1998. Paul and I grew old together, watching our love mature like a fine wine. He retired. I continued teaching for pleasure, not out of necessity. We traveled a bit, saw places I never imagined I would see when I was that frightened girl fleeing on a cold dawn. Today, at 76 years old, I look back and see a life I never imagined I would have. A life with pains and scars, yes, some that never completely disappeared, but also with much love, much joy, many achievements. The broken girl from Bedford, who thought she would never be whole again, built a full life, a loving family, a legacy of protection and care. Not despite the trauma, but transforming it into strength, into purpose, into love. I never returned to Bedford after moving away. I didn't want to. Some bridges don't need to be rebuilt. But I forgave, not for them, who never asked for forgiveness, but for myself, because hatred is too heavy a burden to carry for a lifetime. The silent promise I made to my father at that bus station before leaving for Roanoke was fulfilled. I survived. I became strong. I built a life he would be proud to see. And most importantly, I broke the cycle. My children, my grandchildren, none of them knew firsthand the kind of horror I knew. They grew up and will grow up surrounded by love, respect, security. This is my greatest victory, my greatest legacy. My dear viewers, if this story touched your heart, please leave your like and subscribe to the channel. Each subscription gives me strength to continue sharing these memories, which aren't always easy to relive, but which can help someone who's going through difficult times. Remember to participate in the $500 giveaway. I'm eager to know who will be the winner. A warm hug from Grandma Jean, who learned that the scars we carry don't define who we are, but what we choose to do with them does. Always remember, the greatest revenge against those who try to destroy you is to live a full, happy, and meaningful life. That's what I did, and that's what I wish for each of you.